Well, all right, KJ's here, so the recording can start. Thank you again for all your help. Ari, as usual, it's such a pleasure. It's worth coming just to hear you play. So, last week, Barbie asked a question. So, how do we get no to be heard? I'm paraphrasing. Her question was a little different than that, but it made me think a lot. How do we get our no to be no? And it's an important concept for those of us that tend to be codependent or give in too much or live our lives for other people's purposes. We tend to give in or not be heard when we say no. And what we were saying last week was that your brain doesn't know what don't is. And so no is a difficult concept because no doesn't have a real meaning by itself. So today we want to talk about how to set a boundary is the bottom line. And it's an interesting topic. How do we get there? And it's not usually what we think it is. Specifically, it's not the words that we say.
Boundaries are a very tricky thing. I think that we talked a little bit about it before, but that the thing that we teach our clients is we teach them to forgive, and forgiveness leads to truth, and truth leads to better boundaries. And so when I have forgiveness in my heart, and I'm not carrying a grudge against someone specific, or a grudge or a hurt from my past that maybe is a reflection of what's happening in my present. I don't bring that. If I've forgiven that, I don't bring that to that conversation. I don't allow my pain or my fear. Actually, for me, it was my fear of being disapproved of. I don't allow my fear of being disapproved of to change my boundary, because the truth is that I've learned I don't have to worry about what other people think about me, because they rarely do. And if they do and they are judging me, that's on them and not on me. And so I'm able to most of the time release that, offer myself grace extension, and give out grace extension to the people around me, and most of the time see things for what they are, and be able to have that good space that says, hey, right now I need to take care of me, and so this is what I'm going to do.
Yes, and so we have to back up again and begin at the beginning. How do we learn boundaries? And it begins with trust. And trust you can find on the wheel here. Trusting is in the peace wedge, surrounded by independence and security. So we have to have some independence and some security in order to develop trust. And so the best example is, everybody's seen this happen. Somebody with a 2 or 3 year old child comes around, and the 2 or 3 year old child is being a 2 or 3 year old child, and they're getting into little messes, and doing things that, whatever they're exploring with their hands in their mouth, and they're not necessarily appropriately. Not everything is clean enough to be put in your mouth, and so the mom or the dad, they're sitting there saying, no honey, and yet often the reinforcement doesn't happen. So the no, here we go, no, what does it mean? When someone tells you no, does it mean you do it 3 more times until they raise their voice and say no? Or does no mean no? And so that trust, that security, that ability to be independent and be self-accountable is really learned very, very young. And so then And everybody has their own definition based on what happened when their parents said no. When my dad said no, you did not do it again. It just simply was not an option. But for others, no, honey, no, don't do that, please don't, stop, is an ongoing commentary. And so fast forward to the teenage years, and so now we're learning how to be our own person and separate from our family. And we hear things like, oh, and everybody has their own reaction to it.
Take note that across from trusting, if you took a ruler and you put it across the feeling wheel, across from trusting is confused. And I think that to speak directly to what Jamie is saying is that when we are little and we're hearing, we're doing something and we're hearing no, but then it's not reinforced, or we're hearing no about everything, like don't have your feelings, don't be really who you are, you're not allowed to be disrespectful, you're not allowed to be hurting, you're not allowed to be angry, you're not allowed to be disappointed. The funny thing is, adults around me when I was a kid, and then as an adult, we all have bad days, and kids are going to have bad days, and it's okay to allow them to have those bad days and have those feelings and to be able to express them appropriately, and then to have a conversation about it and move through it. And so I think that confusion, I think I was confused a lot when I was a kid, a lot of mixed messages, and so confusion blocks that ability to trust, blocks the ability to trust when I'm a kid, the adults around me, and then blocks the ability for me to trust as an adult. And remember we talked about the pendulum swing, that early stages of development that is learning trust or mistrust from in the womb, from really conception to about a year and a half, 2 years old, you're learning to trust. And so that foundational trust can either take you to a place where most of us have some issues with trust. Some of us, that wasn't our main stage of development where we have issues that come from. But in that trust issue, we either trust too much or we trust nobody. There's not that balance that says, okay, I'm going to trust myself and my intuition, and I'm going to cast my intuition out there, and I'm going to say, okay, this situation is safe, this situation isn't. In this situation, I need to say no. In this situation, it's okay for me to say, let me think about it. In this situation, it's great for me to say yes because I'm in a good space to be able to do so. And so the working through the confusion, understanding where confusion comes from, which is foundationally from shame, that confusion, once it's worked through, then we can start having trust for ourselves, and then trusting ourselves enough to know when to trust other people.
Okay, so confusion. This is an important concept. One of the ways that I understand confusion is through how our skin operates. We feel things through our skin. There are four kinds of receptors, types. There's 4 types of receptors. There's light touch, hot, cold, pain, and deep pressure. And deep pressure is a type 4 receptor. And so what happens? Okay, so what happens? You bump yourself, you cut yourself. What do? Anybody? What's your first reaction when you bump or cut? Yeah, you press on it. Deep pressure, cry. Yeah, pull back. Exactly. First we pull back. Wow, what was that? Second, it's actually the second thing we do. Yes, rub or press. And this is a survival technique. Yeah, the kiss hopefully comes after the initial pain, right? and so what happens is the type 4 receptor, it literally expands itself and squashes the other three receptors. It says, this pain is important and it needs to be taken care of. And so if it's too painful, we won't be able to handle it. So the type 4 receptor says, I'll squash it. Well, confusion operates in much the same way. And as we're learning how to use this wheel, we look at confusion. And where is it related? Like Marla said, it's related to trust. And so that trust is fundamental. But if we fold the wheel in half sideways, we see that confusion and ashamed occupy the same space on opposite sides of the wheel. And when we have shame, when we have a shame that says, and then remember, the difference between shame and guilt is, guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am a bad person. And so when we have shame, that's an overwhelming feeling. It says, I am bad. Then we get confused. And that confusion protects us from the pain of shame. You're cutting out, babe. No.
Okay,
There you go.
Is that better?
Yes.
All right, I don't know what's going on my end. I may need to restart my computer. Something's being weird here. So anyway, apologize. So type 4 receptors, pain, those kinds of things. So emotional pain and trauma creates that space of confusion. And if you look on the wheel, the opposite of trauma, so trauma is up on the left-hand side of the fear wedge in the middle section. You look across from trauma, and it's confident. So when we have emotional pain, emotional trauma, and we work through that, and we are able to move past that confusion, we move into this place of confidence. And around confidence is awareness and creativity. And once we're able to land in that confident place, it's interesting because there's a lot out there about narcissism right now. And a narcissist is an immensely overconfident person. So we're not talking about the overconfidence. We're talking about true, humble confidence that says, I'm okay no matter what you think about me. I feel worthy, I feel happy, I feel content, I feel the bottom side of the wheel, peace, empowered, and joyful about myself. And you can love me or not, and it's not going to take away that true confidence that I have. So there's a difference between this super confident, overly confident person, and not to throw Jamie under the bus, but he definitely used to be a more overconfident person back in our younger years, and he kind of had that cocky attitude that I totally understand now. Of course, I fell in love with him, so there was something about it that I liked, right? And I think that I had that overconfidence. I was right about everything. I knew everything. Here I am in my 20s, and people are saying to me, oh, so would you rather have us come to you about everything or go around you and get things done? And I look at that now and I think, wow, the things that I could have accomplished had I been in that humble confidence, as opposed to that more cocky, I have all the answers confidence. And so stepping out of trauma and confusion, and really truly what we're talking about foundationally is stepping out of shame. The top side of the wheel, the black and white in the center above forgiveness, is the shame. So stepping out of that shame, what does that look like? How do you get there? And we use tools in our coaching to help people move from shame into love, so that shame that's in that top side of the wheel ends up turning into rejection. Rejection is a real thing. We will continue to get rejected by people and things. That's just part of life, but it won't touch our shame and say, oh, I'm a horrible person because they're rejecting me, or this happened, I did this wrong. And then after rejection, you get enough forgiveness going, that shame in that top part of the wheel actually turns into love. And so you end up having this beautiful love sandwich, that everything in the top side of the wheel, the abandonment, fear, and control wedges, everything that you may end up feeling that's from up there, you filter through love instead of shame, and it transforms everything, transforms you, which transforms the relationships around you. And the thing with that is, just a quick little caution, is that when you are transformed in that way, there are people around you that are used to you being there, for lack of a better term, bitch, and they don't like that you are then not that person anymore. And so there will be people that aren't as fond of your transformation, but it's for you, not for them.
Right. And Marlo's right. I was very cocky. I was so insecure in school and with peers. I was the king of the nerds, really, truly, um, um, in grade school, and had a kind of a breakthrough experience in 8th grade where I fought the class bully in front of the whole class, and I didn't really win so much as I just held my own, and that was winning enough. And so then I had a new form of confidence, and that I learned that if I could cuss louder and be a bigger jerk than everybody else, that I earned a certain level of respect. And so that false confidence, that pretending to be confident, became a very successful habit of mine. And then, so fast forward into doing a lot of this work, learning what we call humble power. So we look at the wheel on the green wedge and we have power. Well, the better definition for power is humble power. And so a few years ago, it's been about 5 or 6 years now, Marla says to me, we've been doing this process for almost 10 years. We're having tremendous success helping families stay together and healing people, and it's just this phenomenal, beautiful thing. And truly, you get a humble power when you get to live in that humble power place, faithful, important, respected, true pride, not hostile pride, and awareness. You live in that place, and you have peace and joy at your side, and you live in this loving situation. And so I was feeling truly, humbly blessed and powerful. And then Marla says to me, you've been a little shorter lately with me and kind of a jerk and cussing more. And what we discovered was that those old habits that old habit that I learned way back in 8th grade and practiced for years, it was a very successful strategy, by the way. The reason why we use strategies like being overconfident is because they give us something. And so by pretending to be confident, I wasn't necessarily genuine, but people learned to expect me to lead. And so that was very powerful and very, it worked, even though it began to kill me. And so then I figured out that habit, it was still in my brain. There was still a pathway in my brain. Now remember, how many of you tried brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand, by the way? Did we ever get answers on that? Did anybody try that? Yes, good. And it's very difficult, right? And so the reason why is because we have this motor pathway in our muscles and in our brain. And so behavior is reinforced that way. And so in my brain, there was this false confident path. And when I got this true humble power, it was being activated as a shortcut. Oh, this is what being confident means to your brain. Your brain doesn't have an oversight unless you provide it. And so examining our behavior and seeing that those old pathways need to be, and this is where we use cancel, right? So I break that old pathway by saying, you know what, I'm not going to cuss. And cussing is a really good example. There's a good, I'd like to say that I saved my cussing now for effect. And there's a really powerful effect on certain cuss words in the right situation, depending on who you're talking to, right? It's important to know who you're speaking with and how they might receive it. The key here is that when you want to extinct a behavior, like cussing, that can become a very subconscious habit and can be said in front of children that you don't want to be said in front of. Cancel. As soon as you say it, say out loud, cancel, and you will extinct that behavior very quickly, especially if you're consistent. And so I canceled out the cussing and realized that that I didn't need to be short with Marla, that I could be present and connected and a lot more powerful really by being kind and connected. So how do we get our no to mean no? It's using the same kind of training. Boundaries are not the words you say, but the will in your heart. You cannot keep a boundary with someone who's trying to break those boundaries if you do not have the will to stand up for yourself and ultimately respect yourself enough, value yourself enough to say, this is not okay with me. I will not allow this to happen right now. We have a great story, Marla can begin it, with setting boundaries with my dad, who it was a rageaholic, was what I call it. He had a very abusive childhood and then did 2 terms in Vietnam and came home and adopted me. Fell in love with my mom, married her, and adopted me. And he could fly off the handle in a moment. And like I said, Marla can begin the story of how when we had Kayla, how we began to set boundaries with him.
So we had been to Jamie's parents' house. They lived back east, and we had visited them a few times without children. And when we were going back there when Kayla was just a little one, I remember we had this conversation about not allowing Jamie's dad, Bob, his anger, his rage actually, to really be present with us or around Kayla. It was just Kayla at the time. And so we talked about it and we said, okay, if he rages, we are going to say this or do this. And one of the things that we came up with was, okay, we will pack up our things and go to a hotel. We won't leave Maryland, but we'll pack up our things and go to a hotel. And, basically we didn't know the phrase at the time, this is not okay with me, but that was kind of what we were going to be doing. And so he, of course, ended up going into a rage about something. I think that particular time it was about, we were playing a game, we were playing Hearts, which, can get a little bit crazy. And we all conspired, he was winning, and so we all conspired, carefully conspired against him for him to get, all of the points. And it ended up happening, and he got very angry, and he slammed his beer on the table, and he yelled and went over to the refrigerator and pulled it open like it was going to break off the hinges, and was just really being loud and rageful. And Jamie and I just kind of looked at each other, and then he just stopped and then got something out of the fridge, came back and sat down, which was highly unusual because in the past he would have not, he would have kept going, and then we would never gotten back to the game. And of course it was like, something like a hand grenade had dropped into the middle of everything, and we were all sitting there with our limbs and falling off and bleeding. It's a horrible picture, but or a horrible visual, but that's what it felt like. So it was like this grenade tossed in the middle of the room, and here we are bleeding, but he came back to the game, and so we just kept going as if nothing had happened. And during that visit, he would do that. He'd come right up to our boundary, and then he would stop, and then he'd find another way around it. And so after we left, we talked about, okay, next time, what are we going to do so that that next level of breaking our boundary doesn't happen?
And so each year we would go back to visit, we would set a new boundary, and it was crazy because we would we would practice, ahead of time, and we would say, this is what we're going to allow, what we're not going to allow. And what would happen is he would fly up to our boundary each year and stop. Well, what we learned about boundary breakers was that he would go along that invisible boundary, kind of like the mime, the mime in the park that, walking along a glass wall, and then he would reach around and poke us from behind. Find another way to be, he would, so, one year, after a couple of years of this, he would stop raging towards us, and then he would rage towards my mom. And then we had to figure out how to get another boundary up for that. And finally, ultimately, we had to just confront his anger head on once we had enough skills. And we didn't do it perfectly. It was early on. And when I confronted him, it was over the phone. And he had a few choice curse words to share with me before he hung up. And we didn't talk for 9 years. How do you get your no to be no? By meaning it. By being willing to separate yourself from the toxic situation enough to have a good, healthy boundary. And so there was a couple of emails at first between my dad and I. He was really good about listing all the things that I had done wrong since junior high. At the time, at this point, I was 33. So after those initial emails, there really wasn't any conversation at all. We didn't visit. They didn't visit. My mom chose to not engage with us because my dad had a problem with us. I did talk to her a few times, and occasionally we would talk. And yes, Ari, there's a great end to this story that Marla will have to tell after I finish this section, and it's so impressive that Marla could do what she's done. But so that 9 years went by, and I tell you what, it was the best 9 years of my life. I felt more free than I had ever felt in my life. I had realized that I was trying to please my dad in most of what I was doing, looking for that attaboy that very rarely came. Yeah, it was tremendous. It was absolutely tremendous, and I actually love him more as a result, right? Because so after the 9 years, Ariel, our youngest, was going to have a wedding. It was a very beautiful time in our lives, 3 years ago now. And so we asked Ariel, what do you want Grandma and Grandpa at your wedding? And her new husband is, very family-oriented, and between the two of them, they said, well, yes, of course, if they would be willing to come. Let's please invite them and try to make that happen. So I reached out to my mom first, and then just before that time, some of you are familiar with some of our process, the forgiveness part of our process. part of that is a letter that we do. It's a tool that we use, the letter. And we don't generally send the letter. Matter of fact, we advise that you never send the letter until you're far beyond the initial letters. I had written my dad forgiveness letter and letter back, probably about 15 of them over the 9 years, because every time I would get triggered by something that he wouldn't engage in or that was an issue that I had because of him, I would have to, instead of losing sleep, I would write this letter of forgiveness, forgiving him, and then write a letter back from him to me, hearing what I needed to hear. And that's a magical piece that we'll have to talk about later, how that works in our brain to unlock the ability to see a bigger picture. But I had done that many times, and I came to the conclusion that I could write the apology letter, the letter back, to him, knowing that he had felt disrespected by me. Even though I didn't feel like what I had done was disrespectful, I decided that I could write that apology letter. I wasn't perfect in how I handled things, and I realized that I had made some, tactical errors as I was setting my boundaries, needing my space to get away from that toxicity. And so I went ahead and I wrote the apology letter to him, and I sent it. And mailed it to them, and I checked with my mom to make sure that he'd gotten it and that he had read it, and he had. So I said to my mom, listen, I think it was about 4 or 5 months before the wedding, there's going to be a wedding. We would like you guys to come. And so we sent the invitation. I think I had a brief conversation with him, kind of like on speakerphone when I was on the phone with Mom, and they decided to come. Now, I didn't say anything about our boundaries, about his anger, but what I had said that in that conversation 9 years earlier was that if we're going to be together, there's going to be a boundary about your anger. And so I let that stand and never backed away from that. And they came, and he was on his best behavior during the wedding, and all the, we had about 3 or 4 days together, and he was on his best behavior, and it was a very nice visit. It went very well. Now, I did hear later that he did, from my brothers, that he did chew up one of the hotel staff where they were staying, and spit them out like he does. So he's not, at that time he had not, quite given up on that. but the boundary with us was solid, and it was impressive. And then we went to my dad's sister's funeral, and Marla has to tell you what happened there.
Pretty amazing, pretty phenomenal experience. Jamie had said, hey, my aunt has passed, and I'm going to go to the funeral. And I said, well, I'm coming with you. And he said, really? You want to go? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I want to support you. And he said, well, my parents will probably be there. And I said, well, yeah, of course. And, I'm totally good with that. And, since the time we have been together, so we met when we were 18 back in 1987. And I'm pretty sure that they have disliked me from that time forward. So it's been a lot of years that they haven't really appreciated me. And mostly that was because of, I think, looking at it from this perspective, that I took Jamie away from them. And so that was very painful for them. And so I've tried so very hard in many, many ways to connect with them and to, get them to like me, which of course doesn't work very well when you're trying to get someone to like you, right? And so, I had really I have done a lot of forgiveness letters to them and back from them and burned those, read those and burned those. And so I had been feeling a lot more peace about them than I had ever. And so we get to the funeral and give everybody hugs, and they giving them hugs. And it was a little bit awkward, but it wasn't too bad. And then during the funeral, Jamie's dad started talking about the anger and the rage that comes with being an O'Rourke. O'Rourke was the his dad's. It was his mom's
Well,
maiden name, and that the O'Rourke's, of course, very Irish. He said, the anger of the Irish and the rage, and he was talking about that, and then he looked directly at me and he said, "I am so grateful that some of you chose to, I don't know why you chose to marry into this family, but I'm so grateful that you're here and that you've stayed." And, that I kind of was shocked by that and taken aback by it, but his eyes were so full of compassion, and I was just, amazed. And he was shedding tears, and I don't think I've ever seen Bob cry. So a few minutes later, as he's talking, he looks at me again, and he says something like, "I am so, so sorry." And it just hit me, and I felt overwhelmed with compassion and love for him. And afterwards, he was very connected. We had, you know, not deep conversations, but good conversations, healthier conversations, connected conversations throughout that evening. And they had to leave the next morning early, and so we didn't get a chance to see them after that. But there was so much healing that I experienced from that. And I know that for me, it was making that choice to forgive, no matter what they ever thought of me. It was making that choice first and stepping out of that trauma and confusion that I had had with them for so long. And then just slowly moving from that hurt and anger and trauma to acceptance and some pity, and then moving into truly loving. And I've had a couple of situations where that has happened, and it's really not me. There's no way within my own power that I could love these people that have obviously hurt me. And of course, perception is reality, right? So for me, that's my perception of what happened. But being able to move into that space of love has been crazy, because I never thought that I could do that. And so for me, I believe that there is a power of force that's greater than me, and that's where I was able to get that love from, and the filling up my heart with love as opposed to pity or anger or trauma. It really has been this incredible journey, and it's a daily journey. It's sometimes a moment by moment journey in staying in that love, peace, power, and joy, as opposed to letting the abandonment, fear, and control and shame take over. And, it's the layers of the onion. What's the next layer of the onion? It never reaches a plateau. It keeps on coming. It keeps on going. And for that, I am very grateful, because I can continue to grow and learn, and hopefully honor and respect other people in their journey, and know that their path is perfect, and love them in their path no matter where they are, even if it hurts me at the time.
so how do you make your no mean no? It means that you've forgiven yourself, that you've allowed yourself to have good boundaries, that you know what those are. And so when you are able to live in the present, feel your feelings, allow them to be real, but not allow them to dictate your behavior. I like to use the illustration, I don't always like to take out the trash. I don't feel like it. But if I allowed that feeling to dictate my behavior, pretty soon we couldn't get in the kitchen, right? There'd be too much trash piled up. We have to allow our feelings to be real, and allow our minds to see how to reach our true objectives. Our true objectives are to be free and to be connected at the same time, and to be fully expressed in our feelings without allowing them to dictate our lives. Otherwise, we'd all act like 2-year-olds, and every time we didn't get our way, we'd just throw a fit and throw our bodies on the ground and stomp our feet and until somebody gave in. That wouldn't work very well. So it's not an easy concept. It's not something that you just say, okay, I'm going to make my no mean no today. You have to practice. You have to be willing to to accept some feedback, to do the hard emotional work of learning to love yourself, respect yourself, and value yourself, so that you can have a fair boundary about what it means to be you, and who you're willing to interact with, and how. It is amazing what happens when you set your will on a positive boundary. We have seen the worst boundary violators stop and behave themselves. And it's just wonderfully rewarding. But it's, like I said, it's not easy. So, any questions today? Let's open up discussions. Any situations? How about let's look at, does anybody have a boundary breaker in their life that they're having trouble with, that they would like to bring the scenario forward, and maybe we could help them problem solve? Okay. Lady White, what do you got? I can hear the typing happening furiously. Were you volunteering? Anybody? Oh, I didn't see that. No. But yes. Well, I just talked to my parents yesterday, as a matter of fact. My dad just went and rode his Harley up around the Northwest with my uncle, and that was fun to watch happen and be a part of through Facebook. We are moving healthfully forward. My brother got married, and Marla and I went, and I performed the ceremony, and we sat at the family table together. That was a year ago now, and we have maintained, so over the last 3 years, things have progressed nicely. I think we're both in a better, healthier place, engaging safer. My dad was actually on the way back from that trip. They were in the motorhome, and he was out walking the dog right before going to bed, and it was storming, and a tree branch hit him in the head, and he nearly bled to death because they were in the middle of nowhere by Pueblo, Colorado, and so that was interesting to me. The thought of losing my dad was a lot more dramatic for me than I expected it to be after so many years of ambivalence and hurt. But yeah, we're moving really well, and we're hoping to go visit again here in the fall. Hopefully, because my parents live on the Potomac River, and so we're hoping to go boating this year with them, first time in many years. Okay, so no scenarios. Yeah, I guess so. Okay, well, maybe this is, well, you know what, that's actually, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to open up some small groups. Today, We're doing some leadership training right now for a couple people that have volunteered, and we're going to hopefully get some small groups to form out of this group so that we can actually take this into a more personal conversation with everybody. What we know about small groups, yes, lots to think about today. What we know about small groups is they really need to be small. This group is too big for a discussion, open discussion, and interaction. But we hope to form maybe 3 small groups, and then the leaders of those groups can filter questions through, and we can all work together to help each other, develop this community to really, to a place where we can do some powerful problem solving and community building. And that's always our goal. Marla and I have always looked at community as the answer to most of these challenges that we have. Real briefly, the reason why community suffers today, I believe, is the progression from the 1930s. Prior to 1930, in all of history of the world, something like 90% of everyone lived on or near a farm with extended family. So here we are, not even 75 years later, and or about 75 years later, and there's very little extended family available to us nearby. And so the skills that we're taught and learned, many of them are in our process. But there aren't very many places in our culture. So as we look forward to building community, pay attention to how these groups are forming and when they are so that you can be a part of that. And we just thank you all for coming. And I guess we'll close the recording here and have a few minutes of, hanging out at the end. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.